Hello, we've got a special World Book Day episode here on Talking Business because it's not every day you get to chat to a real life novelist, but that's exactly what I get to do today when I chat to Katie Lowe. So, Katie will be talking to us, amongst other things, about literary and creative writing careers and just tons of other really useful stuff that I hope you find insightful and motivational for you as well. So, hey, you didn't come here to watch me. Here's Katie Lowe.
Hi everyone, we are talking business again today. We've got Katie Lowe here with us. Hello Katie, how are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming along. We really appreciate it. So we've got World Book Day coming up soon, or maybe it's behind us whenever you're watching this video. So we're talking literary careers. We're talking maybe a bit of marketing careers and careers in the arts and studying beyond a degree. So we've got all kinds of things we're going to talk to Katie about today, which is really exciting. So who is Katie Lowe? Katie, I'm going to ask you that because you can answer it better than I can. So who are you and what do you do?
I can try. I feel like my therapist asks me that all the time. I'm a novelist. I live in Worcester. I've been published. I've got 2 books. My second one is coming out this year. It's just come out in the States, which is why I'm getting a little bit confused. I also work as a freelance marketing professional. I'm currently working on the NHS vaccine rollout, but I've also worked with the Royal Palaces, Samsung, lots of things like that as well. And I live on my own at the moment, although I used to live with my sister before she had to move in with her boyfriend for the pandemic. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's quite varied. So where's the link there between working as a marketing professional and working as a novelist? Because that's not something that me and my students would normally say, oh yeah, well, I do this and I do this. Normally you'd pick one thing at university and you just do that forever. So yeah. How does that work then?
Well, it's sort of a lot of accidents, if I'm honest. I graduated bang smack in the middle of the big recession that we had in 2008. That was when I finished uni, and so there were no jobs. There was just nothing going. And I'd always wanted to write, but I just thought there just wasn't anything that I could kind of do. So I put my writing aside as something that I would do as my hobby, my kind of, my passion that I would pursue in my free time. But then I just, I applied for 200 jobs, and I managed to get an admin job for a recruitment agency. And my marketing career has been a lot of accidents, a lot of things where I've gone, I can probably figure out how to do that. I can probably take on that bit of, this role that no one else is covering in this business, and over time, that's grown where, the more things I've been open to, the more opportunities have opened up to me. But at the same time, I carried on with my writing on the side. For a long time, I had a blog, a sort of, it was about body image and, a lot of sort of, feminist things like that. I did that for a while, and that was how I met my agent, and we submitted a non-fiction book which did not sell, and that's a really good tip if you're going to be a writer. Get used to being rejected really soon, because you have to get good at handling rejection before the good stuff happens. But then she advised that maybe I kind of pursue fiction, and I did that alongside my job. I've had, I think, a couple of years where I wasn't working alongside writing. I was full-time novelist, and that's supposed to be the dream, and I think for a lot of people it is the dream. But I will be honest, I missed it. I missed having the kind of rush and the sort of juggling lots of things. I found sometimes with writing, you get so far into a story and then you've got nowhere else for it to go. You kind of need to let it sit in the back of your mind and figure itself out. And for me, the best way to do that was to throw myself into a work project. So not having that was really, it didn't help me. So this year last year when the vaccine project came up, obviously it was a huge, I was really flattered to be asked to be part of it. It's an incredible thing to be part of. But also I was really glad to get back to work. I was quite keen to throw myself into it and, get that old rhythm back of writing part-time and, working part-time as well. So I'm kind of I like to do a lot of things at once.
Yeah, so this 9 to 5 job then is not Katie.
No. And I think, I do think it was, the sort of economy the way it is nowadays, you kind of have to, if you're gonna pursue writing, I think you kind of have to be open to that as an option, just because it's a lot of writers I know have other careers that they do, and they might not necessarily be quite as, I love my career being really intense, it's great, but a lot of writers prefer to have something that's kind of a little more on the side, a little more low key.
Yeah. So talking about writing, man, we've got some great questions from our students. So how do you start, or how did you start a career in writing? Has it always been a passion, or was that come through lessons that you had at school or college? How did it get started for you?
I loved writing when I was a kid. I used to make stuff up. I actually, when I was, I think 9, I won a competition on Newsround for a story that I'd written. So I was writing pretty early. But I never really saw myself as doing fiction. That was something that came late. I knew I wanted to write something. That was always, I just would always have a pen and a notebook in my hand. And for a long time, I thought maybe I wanted to be an academic. I still haven't quite ruled that out. I've kind of got a PhD that I started a couple of years ago and then have put it on hold because I had to, get the books out. But it was, the career, as in the sort of paid for stuff, really came out of a couple of routes. It was the blog first, which I did. Like I say, I picked up an agent from that after about 18 months, I think, of writing the blog, which is quite quick. I was quite lucky. The way I met my agent was we got into an argument on Twitter about whether a certain man was attractive or not. And we sort of had a giggle together, and it turned out she'd read one of my blogs before, and then we went for a coffee, and it went from there. So we met through that, and it was she's lovely. She's great, and she encouraged me to pursue fiction as an option. But on the side, I was also doing business proposals, that kind of writing as well. So that's really where I got into my freelance. I work freelance now. I used to work for agencies. So writing a lot of things like this is probably the sort of boring thing that you might not come across until you're in the kind of working world, but the tender proposals. So things like if a business is requesting, they're looking for a new supplier for something, they will put it out to certain to a bunch of businesses, and those businesses will submit a tender document, and that will that will decide whether they are suitable for it or not. Now, I got my start in writing a lot of those for a lot of different companies, and that was kind of how I ended up working with brands like Nike and Samsung and stuff, because my approach was always that I could use my creative writing skills and all the things that I'd learned about writing to make a better pitch than anyone else's. So it was almost using those, sort of thinking outside the box a little bit. We would send over, ridiculously creative responses to tender, but it was, close to 100% success rate by the time.
I guess you were offering something different, weren't you? You were standing out, and it wasn't the standard tick box that that they might expect. So.
Definitely. And the thing is, then when you learn to write for businesses, it gives you a really good it makes you really adaptable, so it's not necessarily just writing a novel, for instance. You've got to get into that character's voice or that that world, whatever. But with businesses, you've got to kind of got to adapt to their voices and their kind of tone and what it is that they're looking for. And then I work across things like social media for for sort of NHS accounts and things like that. It's just sort of anything that you can think of that would count as written that falls under the marketing area. You kind of end up just jumping on things like that and applying those skills in the same way.
Well, how interesting is that then? So when it comes to freelancing then, do you find that risky? Is there any kind of bit where you're a bit kind of scared of it in terms of, you know, because we all have bills to pay, you know, mortgages, bills, and we've got to keep our houses warm and lit and eat food and things. So does freelancing bring a risk to you now versus maybe when you started it? And was that a conscious decision that you said, I want to be a freelancer because that's the way of life I want?
Yeah, I actually never wanted to be a freelancer because it scares the hell out of me. I stayed in my last agency job for longer than was practical, only because and I say practical only because I was promoting a book at the same time as I was working in the business. So there was no way that I could commit to doing both at the same time. So I had to bow out of my job just before the book started, you know, the book promo kind of ramped up. Because it just wouldn't be fair on them. So I was terrified of doing that. I'll be honest. You know, I was, because you know, I'm the same logic applies. You know, I have to pay my rent, pay my bills. You know, like, I like to not be starving. So I had this image of being a freelancer, of just being, you know, hungry all the time and desperate for money. But the thing that it makes you very, very good at is saving and budgeting. You know, what I find with freelancing is that I will have months where I will earn a lot, you know, because a load of invoices will be paid all at once, you know, and it's so tempting to just go shopping and buy all the things that I've been wanting. But you kind of have to plan in that, you know, all those invoices being paid at once actually represents kind of 8 months of work. And so, you know, that might have to last you the next 8 months. And it's probably, if you're being prudent, worth planning for it to last a year, just in case. You know, it's one of those things where it is risky and it is scary, but if you plan it right, you know, and again, if you're kind of open to opportunities, you know, again, like I will always, you know, keep an eye out for things that I might be working on in a few months' time, you know. So if you know, now obviously I'm working on the vaccine rollout, super busy, not really looking for anything. But at the same time, like I'm working on a new book at the weekends because I know that probably come, you know, end of the summer, the vaccine rollout's probably going to be done. And then I will need to earn some more money. And so then it would be good for me to have a new book to sort of put out to the market. So
when you say working on the vaccine rollout, I mean, we only see this perception of the big centres, you rock up, you get a vaccine, and then you go home. So what do you mean when you're working on the vaccine rollout? What does that mean?
So my role, I work for a GP federation. So that is, you know, all 32, I think, GPs in my area. But they've taken on, so they are running 3 of the vaccine centres. So 3 whole sites, and all of the GP-led vaccine services. So this role, I have to say, is the prime example of realizing, or of kind of being flexible and open to new things, because I had never in my life done publicity and PR before this job. And when I was approached by the lady who was recruiting for it, she was like, yeah, it's 3 days a week writing, you'll be fine, you're totally in your element, you know. And I was like, yes, great, I can do that. And it's not been like that at all. It's been you know, fielding calls from journalists, as you know, as we've just seen, kind of constantly. It's almost a much more intense publicity type job than a marketing job. But you know, the options, when I realized that it was that, were either, you know, I kind of pack it in and I tell them they need to find someone else, or I go, well, you know, I've got a bit of common sense, like I've dealt with similar things, if not the same thing, like I'll be honest with them that you know, there are certain things I don't know how to do, but I will do my damnedest to figure them out. You know, and their feeling was that they'd rather keep me working on it.
Yeah,
so,
and what an opportunity to build those skills that, you know, maybe that wasn't your confidence area, and then in a couple of months you'll be like, oh well, I did that. You know. Exactly.
And I think that's it. You know, most of my career has been built on that kind of wing it until you figured it out kind of approach, which has served me quite well so far, I think.
You know, I like that approach, and I hear that approach quite a lot in terms of, you know, we have to tell students, you will do this, and then you will study this, and then you will get a job doing this. And the number of times that that's actually happened, that of people I know, is I could probably count it on one hand. You know, it
yeah,
really is that low. So you are not going on that hand. You know, that's it's another
No.
person who's not doing it.
Sorry, not another one for that one.
No, I mean, when it comes to studying this, so you said you were studying PhD and you will complete it at some point, no doubt. But one of the students asked, do you prefer studying or working?
That's such a good question, because they are pleasurable in very different ways. You know, like I love the, you know, the in-depth you know, kind of especially with the PhD, because a PhD you are kind of on your own quite a lot, you know, and as a solitary person, I quite enjoy time, you know, spent wandering among a library, you know, surrounded by books and not having to speak to anyone. I love it. Great, happy with that. But I think probably deep down in my gut, I think I probably do prefer working. Mostly because I do enjoy sort of achieving things, you know, and I think not that studying doesn't provide that, but I think with the kind of industry that I'm in, you get that kind of hit a lot more frequently. You know, like if I for instance, you know, a lot of my old job used to be running events, and so, you know, running an event, it'd be huge amounts of stress running up to it, but then when it came off and it was brilliant, it would be that rush of, oh my god, that was amazing. But it wouldn't just be, you know, like with studying, it would be, you know, you've got your end of year exams, or you've got to submit your coursework or whatever. It's a little bit more spaced out, and so you don't necessarily get that dopamine hit, I suppose, that I think, you know, work kind of offers, you know, the kind of work that I do offers. And I think that's part of the reason why I didn't necessarily love writing full time as well, because I think, you know, it takes a long time to write a novel. And the dopamine rewards from that are very low. You know, it's usually that then it needs to be rewritten and rewritten again and rewritten again, and then you put it out and everyone hates it. You know? So like I think
I can't imagine that happening. I can't imagine.
Well, no, I've been quite lucky with the reviews, but you're always expecting everyone to hate it, which sort of tempers everything. So I think, you know, there's a certain joy to, you know, having a task that you need to complete, and if you complete it really well, you can tick it off your list and you can go and do something else.
And it does feel good. Really it feels good in my job as well. I completely understand where you're coming from on that. I mean, when you're talking about how much you enjoy, and you talk about getting the hit from creating a really good piece of work, you know, as a freelancer or whatever it is that you're doing, does the creativity help with your mental health? The reason I ask that, as somebody who enjoys the pleasures of stress and depression and anxiety myself, and I find creativity to help, and for the students again who are going through times that nobody's ever been through before. What about yourself? Does creativity help you and your mental health? Massively. So one of my routines, and it's the routine that I will throw everything out in order to hang on to this routine, is on a Saturday I will not see anyone, my phone is off, I am writing, and that is all I am doing. And it is such, because you know, my job is so intense and so busy and so full on, you know, spending you know 24 hours just in this other world, and you know, sort of purely creating is just, you know, it's the thing that keeps me kind of on track. And I notice when I don't have it. You know, I had a couple of weeks ago I had to have an eye test, and the only day they could see me was on a Saturday, and it threw off my whole week. You know, because I just felt like all week then I was just still stressed from the week before. That's Katie's time. You know, didn't you mean the optician should have took that into account?
Exactly, they should have offered me a better appointment. But you know, I just felt like I was exhausted on the Monday, which was a weird thing because it was only 40 minutes out of my day, and I think it's just that, it's almost that mental thing of, you know, getting that, it always sounds so pretentious to put it in these terms, but almost a meditative, you know, I'm in this other zone, as it were, you know, just focused on this other thing. I think that for me is hugely important, you know. And I get the same kind of thing with reading books. I always try and read a novel in the evenings for about an hour, just to decompress, you know, and calm down, because
switch off,
otherwise I won't sleep. You know.
Oh, interesting. That's I thought you might say that, but to hear it from other people as well is always really kind of interesting. And I hope that people watching this, the students, think, oh, I might try a little bit of that. When we're talking about the stresses and things as well, a lot of our students are going to be leaving college soon. They'll be leaving university in a couple of years, or people who still watch these are. What's careers like in the literary field then? Because all we hear on the news is the terrible news of economies collapsing and all that stuff, which is having a massive impact. Is there still a market for people to create and write, especially when so much is available online for free nowadays, when with newspapers and even downloading illegally? Is there still a career for writers out there?
Yeah, there is, but you do have to kind of go in with your eyes open. I mean, I got really lucky, my first 2 books sold as part of a 6-figure deal, which is, unheard of. There's not many of those happen. And so obviously I was, super lucky in that respect. And that gave me a few years where I could say, in theory, I don't have to do anything now. I could live off this money for a while. But there's a few things at play even with that. That money is spread out over a long time, because you get it spread, you get it in kind of, I think it was 8 increments for mine, over about 5 years, I think it'll be. So, it still kind of works out at, less amount than you would imagine over time. But I was writing very commercial fiction. I had, to some degree, decided, you can choose to write literary fiction or you can choose to write commercial fiction. There is some crossover with those, obviously, but you're going into a different market depending on which one of those you choose to write for. And I decided I want to write commercial fiction. I find it fun. I enjoy it. And so when there is a deal done in commercial fiction, it can be more generous. You don't see that many big deals in literary fiction, just because the market is a lot smaller, and there's less scope for things like TV adaptations and sort of subsequent rights and things like that. So if your heart is set on literary fiction, then you probably need to work on the assumption that you will be doing other things as well. It's just the kind of the realities of the market. But most commercial fiction writers I know also do other things as well. There's very few people who only write. Yeah. It's just not, it's not that lucrative nowadays. But there are a lot of people who write, who they write, but they work in bookshops. They write, but they're also copywriters for ad agencies. They're kind of doing things that are related to the work that they do, so they don't feel like that, that kind of separate from it. It does depend, I mean, nonfiction can really vary. I started out writing nonfiction and, blogging, and I did a couple of news articles, and I thought for a while that I might go down that path instead. And I know a couple of my peers have done amazingly out of that route, where they've kind of, settled into lives as columnists and sold books off the back of it and things like that. So it's by no means impossible. But you do, with nonfiction, have to have something. You have to either be prepared to work. Well, you kind of have to do both. You have to be prepared to work your butt off, just because it's so competitive. Yeah. But also you do have to have something interesting to say. And interesting doesn't necessarily mean controversial. I think a lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah, that is very often that, the only way I'm going to get people to listen to me is if I say something that's going to get them to notice me, and that has to be therefore controversial. And
yeah. And the amount of people I've seen, over I've been writing, I've been kind of like publicly a writer now for about more than 10 years. Probably nearly 15 years. God, I'm getting old. But the amount of people I've seen flame out on that, on that approach of they'll decide that controversy is going to be the way that they go about it. And, they'll kind of spark up and get loads of attention one time, and then they disappear forever and that's it. And I think you're better off, playing the long game, putting in the work, making sure that the work that you do is good and is, really high quality. And, you want it to be something that, like, in a few years' time, nobody ever looks back on their old writing and thinks, I read stuff that I wrote a few years ago and I'm like, oh, but like, at least you don't want to look back and think I was coming from a bad place, as in, like, I was being disingenuous with it. You kind of still want to be able to stand by it in principle, even if
that's who you were at that time.
Exactly. So I think that's, that would be my top tip if you're trying to position yourself as a writer.
I mean, as we get towards the end of this, I wanted to ask you about a topic, if we can talk about feminism for a few moments here, because you've studied that, am I right? Is that part of your PhD?
I'm writing on women's anger in modernism.
So I mean, when it comes to that, because we look at that in class and we talk about things like the Equality Act, we look at the gender pay gap, which is always making the news, and sometimes it's shrunk by 0.5% and sometimes it's gone up by 0.5%, and it's hard to compute that. The students struggle to compute that there is inequality, that there's still issues out there. They haven't been into the world of work. They've only seen it from the perspective that they can see, and that's in the media. So in terms of feminism, and why are we still having to talk about it, and what do we do about it next, and why is it still an important thing that we should still be talking about?
Oh God, that's such a good question.
Yeah, I know. I just thought of that off the top of my head. That's why I didn't email it you earlier.
I'm like, wow, this is.
We should do another interview, shouldn't we?
So I mean, it is still important. I, like, from my personal experience as a woman working in business, you do a lot of times have to try a little bit harder to get the respect that comes, quite often easier to your male peers. And I know that goes double for, people of color, kind of people from the LGBTQ community. It's one of those things where, unfortunately, and it's purely in my experience, purely a matter of, at the moment, at the top of most businesses, the majority of the people at the very top are men, and are white men. And so,
and that's that's proven by statistics. That's not just your opinion.
Yes.
You can easily find the stats to prove that.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I was writing about for my PhD is that you see this in the social media platforms, and so when the board is all white and all male, and then sort of women of color, for instance, are saying we're constantly getting abused on these platforms, it's no surprise really that they get no results when they're trying to ask for change. But that does often ring true in my experience of working in business. And it is one of those things where you find there's only so much you can do on your own, as an individual woman. The conversation still needs to be happening. I mean, the thing I always did was, I'm going to think, it's such a cliche, but I'm going to think to myself when I'm acting in a certain way, or, writing just at the beginning of an email, or being, overly nice to someone, would a man in my position be phrasing it like this? And chances are, no. And so I would kind of, I would rephrase it accordingly. But there is only so much that I can do in my business that's going to make a real difference. I can make sure that my hiring practices in my team are good, and I can extend those hiring practices across elsewhere in the company. But there is only so far that reaches. And so the more we have these conversations, the more of a difference that's going to make. I mean, you see that with the Black Lives Matter conversation that that sort of sparked last year, the changes that came out of that, and there's still a lot of changes that need to happen, but having the conversation is 90% of the battle, because these men were these men were being killed by the police before that. But the conversation wasn't in the mainstream, and so I think it's it's a similar kind of thing. You need to get that conversation and maintain it. In order to make I think
I mean, maintaining it is the key point there, isn't it? Because it did it was of massive prevalence at the start, like March, April last year, and it still is, but it doesn't seem as to be in the headlines as much as it was. No. Because the media ebbs and flows with a variety of things. And I guess the maintenance then of feminism, or just making sure we can all have the same opportunities to go wherever we want to do, is not something that, International Women's Day, great, you can have one day, you know, and that's what I get a lot. That, oh, well, only today do we have to talk about it. You know, and that's obviously not the case, is it?
No. And the thing is, it is one of those things where, you know, the pay gap comes up every year, and that's, you know, and that's discussed. And for me, you know, that meant, you know, asking for a pay rise, and I felt I deserved one, which was often, you know, and you know, just bringing those kind of things, you know, to the what was then a mostly male board at, you know, at the business I worked for, you know, not being afraid to say my rates are this and that's what I cost, and sorry, you know, if you don't want to pay for it, that's fine, you know. It's that kind of, I think you almost have to go against a lot of social conditioning, I think, you know, 365 days a year in order to kind of succeed as a woman, you know, a lot of times. And I'm not saying, you know, all the businesses that I've worked for have been very good, you know, like they have listened when I've made, you know, when I've said stuff. So it's not, you know, I'm not saying that I've worked for like terrible businesses, you know, that are, you know, that have no respect for women. Like, that's not like that. It's almost more when you tell people that they're working on an assumption that you are, you know, lesser because you're a woman. They have that, oh God, I am, you know, no, you know, I didn't mean it. Like, you know, but it's challenging those little biases that they didn't even realize they were, you know, they were picking up on.
Amazing. Thank you for that. That's really interesting to get your insight on that. I'm going to ask you two more questions, if that's all right, as we start to finish up here. So first one, social media. So that's where I kind of found you and saw your Twitter account, and then you can find out anything about anything nowadays online. What's your take on how students should present themselves on social media? And the reason I ask this is because a lot of our students live on social media. You know, I can't get their attention because they're on social media. And that goes for a lot of things, you know, unless it comes through social media, it doesn't really exist. And for their profiles, as they go into university and employment, how should they present themselves on social media, and what should they maybe be aware of when they do it?
Well, always work on the assumption that you will be Googled by someone who is about to hire you. Because, and I say that because I Googled everyone I was about to hire, you know, and I did absolutely make some decisions where I would find that someone was absolutely toxic online and would think they are actually not the right fit for my team, which when they presented themselves so well in an interview, quite often, you know, came as a surprise. So there is, you know, a big disconnect sometimes between the way that people present themselves in job interviews and online. And I think it is essential nowadays that if you are, you know, if you're putting yourself out there and trying to build a professional representation, that your social media aligns with that somehow. And I don't necessarily mean that you have to be professional on your social media all the time. You know, I mean, my social media, I post all sorts of dumb stuff, you know, like
mine's full of cat pictures and all kinds of bad wrestling memes and things like that.
Exactly. Like nobody's expecting you to kind of, you know, to be, you know, I am, you know, professional work bot 101, you know, like it's not that they're expecting that, but and actually personality is sometimes quite good, you know. It's nice to see someone who's got a bit of a sense of humor, you know, like who's got a bit, you know, who's got interests and stuff outside of work. That is super. But the thing that I would, you know, come up against is if they had ever, even in jest, used a racial slur, or, you know, if they were in certain groups on Facebook that would, you know, that were, you know, would fairly be deemed a hate group, you know, that kind of thing. Like, you know, and these are extreme examples, but, you know, it's that kind of thing where, you know, if I've got, you know, two equally qualified candidates that I'm looking at, and one of them is doing these things and one of them isn't, then I'm probably going to choose the one that isn't, you know. And unfortunately, the nature of the job market is that there are a lot of applicants per job nowadays. So, you know, that is super important. But like I say, also, you know, you can still have fun and use it to promote your stuff. You know, I mean, this is something I see all the time, and it drives me nuts. People are afraid to promote their work. And if you're a writer, you're going to have to get used to that. You know?
Does it?
Yeah, like you are going to have to be the number one salesperson for yourself. And so, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it does feel a little bit weird sometimes retweeting praise, you know, like if someone kind of tweets me and says your book was amazing, you know, like I don't, when I retweet that, I'm not saying I believe that my book was amazing. You know, as a writer, you never believe your book is amazing, but I'm marketing myself, you know. I want someone else to think that my book might be amazing and maybe buy my book, you know. And so that's the kind of headspace that you have to get into there, where if it's public and it's on social media, then it's a, you know, it's a way that you are promoting yourself, you know. It's part of your kind of brand, as, you know, as sort of cheesy as that sounds.
Thank you for that, because I do tell them that, but it's normally just me talking again. So for them to hear it from real people, and I've heard it from a few people now, you know, it is important, and you will be Googled. It's as simple as that, because it's so easy to do, isn't it? Well, it takes 10 seconds, if that, and you can make an opinion of somebody from that. So when it comes to, I had another question here for you. Where's it gone? Oh yeah, I got two more questions. I lied. So firstly, your books. We've mentioned the books a few times. What are your books, if you don't mind telling us? And where do we get them from and all that stuff?
So the first one's called The Furies. That was out in 2019, and that's available at all good bookshops and on Kindle. And the second one, so it's called Possession in the States, which is confusing, but it's called The Murder of Graham Catton in the UK, and it's coming out in June the 10th. So that's a more of a murder mystery type book.
Super, thank you. And then last question, just to throw this one on you. If you could go back to when you were 17, 18, as most of my students are, and give yourself one piece of advice that you wish you would have listened to and taken on board and kind of almost lived your life by, what would that piece of advice be that you'd go back and tell yourself?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, aside from like the mullet is a terrible look, shave it off.
How dare you? We're in the middle of a lockdown. What supposed to do?
No, yours is fine. Your hair is fine. The big piece of advice, I think would probably be, you know, have confidence in yourself, you know, because and sort of back yourself, you know, because it took me a while to figure it out, you know, that you know, it's okay to push back on things in the professional world. You know, if you think that, you know, something is you know, that you don't know how to do something, for instance, you know, I mean, admittedly, like, I do end up doing a lot of stuff that I don't know how to do just because the nature of my work is like that. But if your boss asks you do this thing and you don't know how to do it, tell them you don't know how to do it. They will quite happily explain it to you. You know, don't feel like you have to figure everything out on your own, you know, because
they'd rather you do it right.
Exactly. And, you know, I found it because my old job, I was responsible for sort of 4,500 staff. You know, I found the amount of problems that could be solved by staff asking me or asking one of their direct managers a question, you know, rather than just suffering in silence was huge. But also, you know, I just think that's been a sort of philosophy, you know, over time as I've got more confident, you know, the kind of backing yourself and having that confidence to you know, to put yourself forward for things. You know, I mean, I only ended up in marketing because I was working as a recruitment admin, you know, literally just going through CVs, typing the data off the CV into the database, and that was it. That was my whole job. They didn't have any social media at this company, and they were moaning about it in the staff room one day that they didn't have any social media. And I was like, well, I could set you up on Facebook. And then I ended up through the, you know, in the same company working. My work ended up being cascaded across sort of 30 different recruitment agencies. Wow. And then I used that work to sort of parlay my career into an actual marketing agency, you know. So it's kind of one of those things where, you know, if you believe in yourself and you kind of do like raise your hand when you think you know how to do something, chances are opportunities that you actually really enjoy will open up to you. And it is worth noting that this job that I'm doing now for the NHS came as a direct result of my first boss when I was a recruitment admin. She recruited me for this. So remember those people you work with, you know, keep those relationships good, you know, be nice to people, because that's so important. You know, when she called me at the start of this year, I hadn't spoken to her in about 7 years. But she was like, I heard you were back in Worcester, and I heard you, and I was like, yeah, what's up? And she told me about this job, and I couldn't say no, so keep those relationships, because you never know what they're going to turn into.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that advice. Really appreciate that, and I hope that my students take it on, and I hope that whoever else is watching takes it on as well, because that is top-notch advice. I think I'll take it on as well. It was pretty good stuff. So, but no, thank you so much. It's really good of you to give up your time here today. As such a different career from what we normally experience and hear about. So it's really, really great. Thanks for your insights. So I'll stop our recording. We'll say a proper cheerio in a minute. But for now, I'll say thank you very much, Katie, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Katie, for your brutal honesty throughout that whole interview. Such insights and advice and information, really priceless. And thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And to everybody else who's been watching, thank you. Please keep like, share, subscribe, and do all that fun stuff. And say hi on any of the social medias. I look forward to hearing from you soon, and I look forward to seeing you here again soon on the Pardo's Business YouTube channel for the next episode of Talking Business.